From crime to housing to fixing our streets, there's a lot to tackle in Kansas City, Missouri, and now a new batch of leaders will give it a shot.
So help me God. So help me God. Congratulations.
The new city council took the oath of office last week. Along with 5 incumbents, there are 7 fresh faces in districts across the city. Didn't take long for members to hammer out an agenda. At the top of the list, curbing violent crime.
Black, white, Hispanic, mix, it doesn't matter. People have the crime on their minds, and they are looking to us for leadership in order to deal with that.
Before Tuesday's ceremony, Mayor Lucas held a special listening session with a number of groups working to curb gun violence. He also proposed a pair of plans to outlaw kids from buying ammunition without their parents' consent and to ban the possession and sale of parts that essentially turn handguns into fully automatic weapons. So city leaders certainly hitting the ground running here. Here to discuss, please welcome our roundtable of journalists, Brian Ellison, host contributor with KCUR, and KBC9 political reporter Michael Mahoney. All right, first let's talk about the mayor's plans, gentlemen. He says that these were written to avoid Missouri's preemption laws that would make this moot. I imagine he's going to get some pushback here from the state of Missouri.
Yeah, I suspect so. By midweek, by last Wednesday, nothing from the Attorney General Andrew Bailey's office, but I expect that there'll be something later, and there will be probably efforts in the legislature as well to try and limit this. The state's position on this is that city, municipality, whatever, cannot pass laws that preempt state laws.
I think that's exactly right based on past experience, but a couple things to note. Mayor Lucas said on Inauguration Day that he expects this to be his legacy. He wants reducing crime to be the thing that he is remembered for. So I think he's going to be very intentional about this. The second issue, though, is to recognize just how modest these proposals actually are. Not selling ammo to minors, eliminating a particular modification to guns may have some impact, but they're fairly small steps, which I think the mayor would be the first to say. It might be that this doesn't rally quite the level of opposition in the legislature that more significant steps would.
Right, and 2023 on pace to be a record-setting homicide year. They have to do something. Of course, the council wants to focus on crime, right? Some of the new members really want to address housing, especially since many of the KC tenant-backed candidates got in. This is another big issue. They say, Brian, would actually potentially have a ripple effect and affect crime in the city as well.
Well, I think that's right, and that's actually part of something else that the mayor and several city council members have talked about in the past week is the need to think about this comprehensively and not just about a particular piece of gun legislation, but also about prevention, about intervention, about education. And I think that applies to the housing situation as well, to think about ways that the areas where the city actually has more control of its budget, as it does not with regard to policing, what steps can they take? Just this week, there will be a proposal to approve a new development, but with a requirement that a certain number of affordable housing units be part of it.
Yeah, the thing to remember here is that the safest neighborhoods are not the neighborhoods with the most cops in them, okay? They're the neighborhoods that have a vitality to them, some economic strength, some diversity, as well as a big buy-in from citizens to have a safe place. And so the answer and the way out of Kansas City's crime problem is multi-level. It's economics, it's crime, it's prevention. There are a lot of things. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, there's no one quick fix for sure. We mentioned there were a handful of incumbents on the council. The mayor got some pushback from groups like the Urban League for not appointing members of Kansas City's 3rd District, which covers East Kansas City, accusing the mayor of undermining the black community. Here's what 3rd District Councilwoman Melissa Robinson had to say.
And we finally have an opportunity to have a strong seat at the table, and we weren't able to bring that home. That disheartens me, but we're going to turn the page, and we're going to make sure that we work hard to get what the 3rd District residents deserve.
She pivoted a bit here. There's a sense of some community members that urban representatives aren't as included when it comes to leadership roles.
Well, you know, to counter that, the mayor made Brianna Parks Shaw his mayor pro tem. There's a number of other people of color, including the first Hispanic on the city council in a while, with Crispin Ray. I do think that it is surprising that Melissa Robinson did not get a city council chairmanship. After all, she is in her second term, and I believe she's the only incumbent member of the city council that did not get a chair.
She's the vice chair of 2 committees, but I do
Yeah.
think it's not inappropriate to see it that way. Having said that, lots of others think that they should have been represented. There are no Northland representatives on the neighborhoods and planning committee. There are others who would have liked to have been in leadership roles. Eric Bunch, actually, in the 4th district, is not the chair of a committee. There's only so many committees, and that's also part of the mayor's choice. But there's only 4 main committees. Not everyone gets to chair one. Having said that, 3rd district supporters, Melissa Robinson in particular, has pointed to their exclusion as maybe having meaning.
Right, and it can't make everybody happy for sure, but it was certainly ruffling some feathers. Brian Ellison, Michael Mahoney, thank you.